Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the buzz around the fact that Sunak thinks he can face down the ERG at last. If true, and it seems to be very much believed, we may be treated to quite an interesting day tomorrow, especially if Steve Baker resigns over the Northern Ireland Protocol Agreement, and no one really cares. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So ministerial resignations over a particular policy can be very serious. There are two major ways in which it weakens the government. The first is that the public see a divided party of government and it gives them less confidence that they are united in a coherent approach on running the country. The second is that it creates a dissatisfied block of backbenchers who can scupper your legislation and even budgets in an extreme case by voting against them. For example, when David Davis and Boris Johnson quit Theresa May's government over her backstop, she could easily replace them. It's like two people. But it broke her already shaky coalition of Tory factions, who then proceeded to sink her parliamentary votes in record numbers. If several ERG ministers resigned over the deal, you might imagine it would make things easier for Sunak in many ways. He wouldn't have to deal with them. But what it would mean is a large voting block on his backbench, making the job of government impossible if they refuse to follow the whip. Now, the Telegraph this morning is reporting that Steve Baker is on resignation watch. He's one of the more ideological members of the ERG and not the compromising sort. If he doesn't like the deal, he's not the sort of person to consider, is it the best available deal? It's either he either likes it or he doesn't, and if he doesn't, he'll dismiss it out of hand. And if the deal goes through anyway, the sort who might resign in protest over it. The Telegraph claims that Baker has not been involved in recent negotiations, not even been briefed on them, despite being a minister in the Northern Ireland office. Now, what other conclusion could you draw other than Sunak doesn't think that he'd be helpful and doesn't think he'd agree to any credible deal anyway? Now, I have to say that is a small surprise to me because Baker famously called out the DUP stubbornness last year regarding the negotiations. He gave the very strong impression that he was happy to work on a genuine agreement. But I don't know, maybe in the end he didn't really understand what a credible agreement would look like. It's still sometimes hard to tell which Brexiteers actually know what they're doing, are just acting out of selfishness, and which one are deluded unicorn hunters. So if Sunak announces his deal tomorrow, as a lot of correspondents are thinking is now going to happen, we're getting the very strong impression this is going to happen now. It's possible Baker will be gone. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll just, think, well, what's the point in resigning? I don't know. But what about the rest of the ERG, especially those in cabinet? That's what matters. Now, I've been saying for a while that we shouldn't assume the ERG are united on this, or indeed anything. They have a common thread of Euroscepticism. They're like a lot of Brexit groups. They agreed that the UK should leave the EU. They didn't necessarily agree on why, and they didn't necessarily agree on what should happen then. The group formed in order to engineer our exit from the EU. But although they may have shared the same goal of exiting the EU, a lot of them differ on what they want from our post-Brexit future. So now, like a lot of Brexit groups, they've descended into arguments again. There was an ERG meeting last week, apparently, to discuss the protocol, and only 22 people showed up. Now, that's quite a small number in itself compared with how many people are in the ERG, but also consider not necessarily all of the 22 people who showed would have been opposed to an agreement. Some of them may have gone along to argue in favour of it. So the inference here is there just isn't the opposition to an agreement with the EU on the protocol amongst the ERG. Most of them weren't bothered enough to even go along to a meeting, and the ones who were there, I don't know what the split was between those who were opposed to it and those who may have been arguing in favour of it. I've speculated that maybe they think their main prize is the retained EU law bill, although I can see trouble ahead for them there. But whatever the reason, it doesn't look like there would be major opposition to Sunak over his agreement from the ERG. Chris Heaton-Harris, who's the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and a member of the ERG, he's not considered a resignation risk. Suella Braverman was mouthing off a bit at the start of last week, but I saw a report days ago where she was insisting she wasn't going to resign at all. I mean, imagine it, if she did resign, she doesn't get her Christmas wish to see vulnerable people exploited for political gain, does she? No Home Secretary that Sunak's likely to replace her with will be pursuing her petty nonsense. Nobody's really mentioning Penny Mordaunt. I mean, frankly, she doesn't look like she can be asked with anything at the moment since she lost the second leadership contest. She obviously isn't considered a flight risk. No one's talking about her. As for Boris Johnson's supporters, yes, they want to use anything, including this, to weaken Sunak's authority. But if they don't have a significant number of ERG members with them, they don't have the numbers themselves to cause trouble. So it may well be the case that Sunak announces this agreement tomorrow. There's a debate in the Commons. It doesn't sound like there's going to be a vote unless MPs want to force a vote. And it may well be that MPs don't want to force a vote. You know, Dominic Raab was on being interviewed this morning. And even he said, when he was asked, is there going to be a vote, said, oh, Parliament will be able to express its views. That's what Sunak said in PMQs last week. That means a debate, not a vote. So let's imagine Steve Baker resigns in protest. Everyone else shrugs their shoulders, welcomes the agreement. Baker will look a bit silly, not least in public. Bear in mind, he is very much on for losing his seat at the next election. And then where his relevance is gone then. He has no relevance. He exists in Parliament purely as a shill for corporate interests. You know, so the public want this. Most of the public don't actually, outside of Northern Ireland anyway, don't understand what this is about. The public in Britain, which may or may not vote for the Conservatives at the next election, the ones the Tories care about, they don't really know what's going on. They don't know what the Northern Ireland Protocol is. They don't know what the issues are. They don't know what the solutions are. They just know that there's a problem that's been dragging on for years to do with Brexit and that Sunak has solved it. You know, Steve Baker's not really going to improve his chances of winning his own seat by opposing that. And Johnson's supporters, they'll try and force Sunak to keep the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill at least. Because the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, remember, I've said it before, it's not something that helps the government to deal with the issues around the protocol. It's not even leverage. What the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is, I've said it before, it is a button which you press if you want to request a trade war with the EU. It's like the bat phone. Hello, is that the EU Commission? Oh, this is the British government here. We would like a trade war if you don't mind. Would tomorrow be too early? You know, that is all it is. The Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is a trade war in legislative form, which we do not want and we would not win. So that won't be happening. The bill, of course, will be trashed because, my goodness, it's a hot potato. In today's Telegraph, Sunak is reported to have been saying that the bill was absolutely justified at the time when the EU were refusing to negotiate. And you go, yeah, I know what you think. And you go, hang on, when did the EU refuse to negotiate then? Yeah, it's all cobblers. Of course it is. But that's how these things work. In order to get an agreement and sell it to his Brexit supporters as a win, he has to claim that he's forced the EU's arm over something. It has to be sold as a win, not an agreement. Brexit's too divisive to sell anything as an agreement. You have to sell it as a win. We beat the EU. This is the deal. They didn't want this deal. We got this deal by being tough. That's how he has to sell it. It's just how these things work. Nobody in the EU will care either. They don't care how the agreement or the process which facilitated it is perceived by Telegraph readers, as long as the issue is put to bed. But the point is that Sunak is clearly presenting a narrative to justify supporting the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill in the past, but also justify throwing it straight into the bin later this week. He is saying that the bill actually helped bring the EU back to the table which they never left. Again, the narrative doesn't matter that much, and even if you think it does, it's really not an argument worth having. If Sunak can convince enough people so that he can announce his agreement tomorrow, you know, his MPs support it in force by and large, he can announce re-entry into Horizon very shortly afterwards. That will be unlocked immediately. In fact, I think that will come later this week. I think if he announces the agreement tomorrow, if the agreement's all gone through, it's all signed, sealed and delivered and MPs have their say, but ultimately it's gone through, I think before the weekend, it will be announced that we're back in Horizon. He'll then get his meeting with President Biden. The Silver Jubilee for the Good Friday Agreement will be a much more hopeful event and certainly be a genuine celebration. So what we're hearing is that not enough of the ERG are interested in blocking Sunak here. So if all the, and it's a lot of correspondence here, there isn't really any sort of divided opinion amongst those journalists who've been involved in the process. So it sounds like he can face the few members of the ERG who are moaning. That in itself is significant. Consider that David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson have all been forced by the ERG to adopt stupid bloody policies which have been very much at odds with the clear majority of their MPs and the clear majority of their voters, to the detriment of both the country and even their precious party. The same may be true of Liz Truss. I don't know. She didn't last long enough for me to really know. So Rishi Sunak may be the first Tory Prime Minister to have faced down the ERG since John Major 3 decades ago. If nothing else, it is at least a small sign of the Conservatives at least attempting to wrest control back. All of this will greatly solidify Sunak's authority within his party, of course. I know from a point of view of being anti-Tory, you may think, well, we might quite like a bit of argy-bargy in there. But, you know, from the country's point of view, they'll welcome it. It's even likely to make voters think better of him, which can only be to his good for the local elections. I'm not sure it'll help him that much materially, given that the rest of the country is still falling to bits and he's about to raise the cost of energy and fuel just before those elections. I'm really not sure about that one. I'm not sure he's going to get that much leverage from the Northern Ireland Protocol at that point. But it will help ensure that he is the Prime Minister which takes the party into the general election. The elephant in the room, of course, will be the DUP. I don't know whether Sunak's got an agreement with them or he's prepared to proceed without it. We will find out tomorrow, I imagine. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.